Jerry's hot air will keep us warm.
Some days
We're
you're,
off to a
some
great
days you're the
start.
pigeons, and some days you're the statue.
That didn't take long.
Not long at all.
All right, it's 7 o'clock, so we will get this started. Ben, I'll let you start us off.
So 2023 budget, seems like we just passed the 2022 budget. We'll kick that off tonight, and what I want to do is go through a few items. So our agenda tonight is really to talk more about the utilities. But before I do that, I do want to walk you through what we have so far for revenue, what our assumptions are within the operating budget. The information that I'm going to walk through today with you, or tonight with you, you've got in your inbox, you should. And I'll send that over to you. The presentation you might even have too. So that's what we'll do with the end of the night, looking at future budget sessions, what you guys want to take a look at. I know in June we'll have revenues. June 15th, we should have the initial assessed value. We can tell what the whole revenue neutral versus non-revenue neutral looks like right about then. Sales tax will have February, March sales in for May. The key assumptions aren't going to change. And then obviously we can talk about water, wastewater. The intent was to have the electric system kind of talk about some of their information too. But with that, we'll just jump right in. So our budget assumptions, again, this year, revenue neutral levy rate, anything that you're going to see tonight is going to be revenue neutral, no increase in revenue. It's a decrease in levy. Sales tax of 5%. Right now we're running, the county's running about 12, and the city's running about 7. And on the county side, it's mostly use tax. So we plugged in 5%. In the last 3 years, it's been about that too. Other revenues are just 2%. Compensation increase, we had 3% built into this, but then when we got done, I had to pull it out to get to where we're at. You'll see that. So there's a 0% increase in compensation right now. Health insurance at 8%. Utility franchise and admin fee are the same as they always have been. Water base, I say base, that should be consumption charge, 1.5, $1.50. It could be $1. It's not going to be that big a change. If we spread that over 3 years versus 2, that's not going to be a huge change. Right now, it's $1.50 that's built into it. Water's at 5.2, and these are both consistent increases every year. That's what's built into this. No use of electric system reserves, because assuming that discussion is ongoing. So we're not making that assumption. Just a little bit of background. You guys probably remember this. 3 different types of governmental activity funds, tax supported. These are our tax supported funds. General library bond and interest. The cemetery should be over there too. Special revenue are just those that are funds that are isolated for the use of those type of revenues. And then capital improvement. The utilities, obviously electric, water, wastewater, refuse. You guys know that. Anything that we're dealing with, these funds are seen as isolated businesses, if you will. And so each has their own cash account. They have their own revenues. They have their own expenses. There are transfers that go between most of these funds that take place, and it gets kind of ugly after a while. So talking a little bit about the governmental type revenues. General revenues, sales tax at the very bottom, that light green, with the ad valorem real estate property taxes, that darker green, the bigger chunks of the governmental funds. Really, that's general fund. Most of your revenues are going to come from those two. Debt proceeds is the other one. You can see the roller coaster, just because there's not bonds issued every year. Those are where those bonds come in. And the next biggest would be grant revenues, especially in 2001 and 2, because the ARPA comes through and gets deposited within the general fund.
This was as much as has been taken so far.
When
Yeah, that's
We look at the enterprise funds, the lion's share of any kind of charge, utility charges, obviously is the electric fund. The water charges at the top is the next one, with wastewater being the skinny one, if you will. We've talked, I know, about water, wastewater here real recently ad nauseam, but we're going to talk about it again tonight. When you look at general government revenues, just as a percentage, this is 2023. We're still at 40% property tax, sales tax 35%. When I started with you guys, I think that sales tax was around 30 to 33. So it's inching up the right way, right? And so those are the two big ones, fees and charges. And so it's inching up the right way. Yeah, what you said. Special sales tax is
It's a delay in case he cusses.
that's actually misclassification. The special sales tax is other revenues. So your lion's share is those two, property tax and sales tax. When we look at these are the key revenue dashboard that Glenn gets. On the left-hand side is the last few years of revenue on an annual basis, and on the right side is the current year-to-date revenue. Property tax, you don't see much. We get two big disbursements or receipts, January and June. Obviously, we're not in June, so you really can't see much going on there until we hit June. Sales tax is the city sales tax at the bottom. On the left-hand side, you can see that continue to slope up and even through 2020, where everybody else was really losing a lot of sales tax. You guys were a little bit immune to that. On the bottom, the green is last year. The light green is this year. Cumulative, it's around 5% growth in that. When you look at the county sales tax, it's a little different. Their sales tax have kind of started to go up pretty rapidly. This is the one that's around. This is the one that's around 12% cumulative increase over last year. Building permits at the bottom. The trend's been going up on those. We're holding our own right now, with the exception of January of last year. We're neck and neck to month over month last year on building permit revenues. As far as utility revenues, just as a percentage, again, this is 2023. Electric charges are 54%. Water's 25, 18's, or wastewater is 18. You can see solid waste or refuse at 3% for the utilities. And again, for those electric utilities, on the left-hand side, you can see how volatile that gets because of the weather changes. And then the seasonal aspect on the right-hand side, where we're about to head into where people are going to start kicking electric or their air conditioners on. Water's the same way. Water and sewer is the same way. Obviously less volatile. On the left, you can see the history, and on the right, the month over month. And both of those are increases from last year. So they're steady increases, 1 or 2% month over month increases from last year. And it's solid waste on the very refuse on the very far right. I watch refuse really close, because that kind of tells you how many, how many of those residential units are coming on, because they're signing on to solid waste, and you can kind of see some of those revenues go up. Any questions on that so far? Unencumbered cash. This is the one we've been dealing with for quite a while. At least the Budget Finance Committee has been dealing with quite a while. The very bottom is the general fund. The scale on this thing shows 0 all the way to the right, and 180,000 all the way to all the way to the left is 0. 180,000 is all the way to the right. So that bar looks really good, but it's really not. Not that good. So cemetery fund, cemetery reserve funds got a fairly healthy balance as Midland Rail and Trail Fund's got a little bit of cash left over. You'll see that. I'll bring up some of the numbers here in a minute. Utility system. This is all this is at the end of 2023 with the budget assumed completely spent. Just shy of 2 million, or 2 million, kind of where it is now. Water system and wastewater are both positive. The wastewater is positive because there's 320,000 that's sitting in CIP, 40,000 sitting in the operating fund at the end of 2023. So now I'm just going to jump into some of the change the format for the budget this year. What this shows is revenues. I'm going to flip over to the whole page here in a minute. It just shows the cash and what the transactions look like. So all the way to the left, you can see the obviously fund name, but revenues and transfers in, and then less expenses and transfers out gives you a net change. Now within that net change, if you follow the general fund all the way across, you'll see the net change a decrease or deficit of 548,000. Understand there's 260,000 in that. That's a reserve not intended to be spent. So you add that back in there and then add the beginning cash, and you can come up with the ending cash, what our estimated ending cash is. For the general fund, that's 276,000. And I say general fund, that's both general fund and general fund reserve together. In order to get the general fund to a positive fund balance, I mentioned that we pulled compensation out of it. We rolled almost everything back with the exception of those that Rob needed. It was obvious we're either gonna overrun the budget or budget the right way. So those we held the same. So there are some that have increases in them, but for the most part, we pulled them out. Like there's a backhoe that was requested, we put that down into the general fund reserve. There's no revenue, obviously there's no revenue to cover that. At some point, if there's revenue or there's surplus that we can put down in there, that's fine. That's an option we have, but right now it's really not funded. It's there as a placeholder, but it's really not funded. So we do that. I do that for each one of the funds, and I'll come back to that cash. The fund pages are going to look like this. This is the roll-up, what we call the roll-up report. It's got the revenues, expenses, transfers in, transfers out. What you're probably going to want to see more is the expenses down at the bottom, right? So I'm going to jump over to. You should have this in. You should have this in your packet as well. So this is the whole page. This is all funds. Notice, and then what we do is for the utility funds, we put them in systems. So anything's related to that fund, you've got a fund by fees associated with that fund. We put them all, roll them all up into one system. And this is all 2023. There's no comparison on this page. The whole purpose behind this is to give you an ending cash balance, what our estimated ending cash balance is. And that's pulling reserves out of, or actually adding reserves back into the net loss because they're not intended to be spent, right?
Ben, what do you start with though? General fund, is it revenue neutral from last year? Is that the starting point?
That's the starting point.
And then on the utilities, is it estimated with new rates, estimated consumption? What's your starting point there? For the revenue?
What we're doing there is we're starting with 12/31/21 ending cash balance, adding revenues, taking out expenses to get to the beginning 2023. So that's a good point. That beginning cash balance can change based on how the year operates. And without having gone through more of the year than we have no reason to change what that budget looks like, obviously. And we do that for each one of these funds. So that's those funds. We also included just a comparison of some of the categories. So if you look at, take the general fund, for instance, what the increases or decreases are by category. Overall personnel expenses, are they going up or down? Contractual services, same way, up or down, etc. The detail is broken out by department, so you can see admin up here. And I'm not going to go through each one of these because I know you guys can read this trying to get to sleep at night a lot easier than I can. Most of the changes you'll see, and this is comparing prior years. So you've got 19 actual, 20, 21 actual, 22 budgets, and 23's proposed. And then any changes between 23 and 22's budget is in this last column. So this is largely based on departmental requests to the extent that it's modified to get to the cash balances you just saw. And like I said, for the most part, these are personnel related changes. And I think that, yeah, $50,000 in transfers out, that's a placeholder for the bond and interest. I don't think we'll need that, but yeah, so you can just see that some of those changes they're just mostly personnel costs. Parks is one of them that we left modified for what was requested. Some of the items did get decreased, again, only to take some pressure off the general fund. Planning was pretty much left alone. Police department is the same way. There's not police was the one where the car is going to be bought next year, is that right?
Yeah, we've determined that we can't find a 2022 vehicle this year. We've searched all over the U.S. They are not going to come out. Even some of the ones that have been ordered by some other agencies have been declined.
Yeah.
So we're trying to see in July, we can actually request a 2023 vehicle for 2023. So since we're not doing one this year, we're hoping to get two next year.
So what we're going to do in that case, this budget takes the cash out of the general fund and puts it down into reserves for that car. So he can buy it either this year if he finds it, or if it's 2023, it'll be there in 2023. So 22 is balanced based on that, so that cash will be there. And the vehicles that we purchased in 2022 is not leased; they're all cash funded.
And after this, we're going to hear from the departments, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then the revenue. The general fund's really the one that I think we need to discuss more so in June when we get that assessed value. Because then we can really narrow down on what you want to add back or how we want to add it. And in the meantime, between now and then, there may be some other movement on the general fund. Each one of the funds have this little upper window, this upper left window that shows you the total revenues in transfers in revenues minus the expenses or anything out. And it gives you the net increase decrease. The overall, when you take into account the reserves, the overall deficit's $112,000, which isn't a huge number for a $3.8 million budget. But anything you add to it, obviously, going to be a bigger number.
So that's taking into account that all departments are revenue neutral and we still end up with a net decrease?
A net decrease,
In what?
that net loss.
Yeah, what contributes to that?
Well, there's a few things.
Mainly healthcare stuff?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
increases
the
in that
biggest
type of
piece,
stuff.
'cause
Okay.
it's been increasing at an exponential rate. What's built into here is also is capers and KP&F rates for this year. We won't find those. We won't have those until probably June.
Okay.
Last year they didn't change much. This year they might. It all depends.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the biggest piece of it. Unless you guys want to go through all the funds, we can wait to do that later. But any questions on this? A lot of information. Is there any questions that you guys might have or something you want to see for next time on something like this? I know, Mayor, you would ask me, you'd ask me about assessed valuation and an impact on assessed valuation.
Mm-hmm.
And understand, assessed valuation for any given house could be 2 to 15% increase rate. Mine personally went up 16%. We just built the thing. So I used maybe an average of 10%. That'd be 175,000 citywide revenue impact. Citywide, all the revenue, all the levy funds. General fund would be a bulk of that, 125,000. And library's a different issue, but bond and interest would be 26,000, cemetery about 7,600. It's about $1, or it equals about $1 per percentage increase per month, $1 per month per percentage increase. So if our average go from, if it's not 10%, if it goes to 15, there's $5 more a month that you'll see as an impact. So in this case, at the 10%, it was, the 10% was around $10 a month. It was an increase. Typically, we'll put a 2% increase in those assessed valuation, with the exception of last year. It's always been 4%, around 3 to 4% increases. Last year was 14%. So that was there. It's not yet just developed a trend. That's why I'm really not wanting to move forward with any kind of real discussion until we get to that June number. With that, that's all I got for the beginning.
All right. Well, if we want to hear from Wendy, unless she wants to stay through this whole work session, we can hear from you first and then move on to the department.
What would you like to know from me?
Just kind of an overview of what you guys are projecting for your budget and for what your requests. I know you're kind of in the same boat we are, that until June numbers come out, you guys really can't do much. But kind of to the council, I guess, what the library board's thinking.
Yeah. The first thing I want to say is thank you for having me here, and thank you for the flexibility and the trust that you've handed over to the library board in changing the charter ordinance. So we have more flexibility this year than we've ever had before, and we appreciate that. So like you, we are just starting our process. We have had some meetings. We have our own finance committee, and our board in general has talked some. So anything I say right now is preliminary and definitely subject to more discussion. I'm really interested to hear about sort of how you're estimating the increase in assessed valuation, because that's a really big deal for us, of course. So when we are looking at our budget, we were estimating 15%, and that might be too high. I heard you say 10.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to guess, and that's
It
why
is.
on June 15th, we'll know a lot more.
Yeah, and to that degree, it's only been off a fraction. June to the end of the year has only been off a fraction. So it's usually what you can expect in revenue coming in. The other thing that we don't have in here is what has been discussed. I think that 0.2 increase per year. I believe that was what was decided to come to budget with. That's not in here.
Right, and I think what I can tell you, so some things I can tell you. So what we've looked at, and this, again, when the valuation comes in, we'll know more. But what we're looking at is if it's 15%, then we're thinking mill levy neutral, not revenue neutral. So we're not really thinking about that 0.2% because of the huge predicted increase in valuation. So what we've looked at is what dollars do we need to fund our budget, and we are seeing increases just like you guys were talking about. I believe supplies this year, when we look at our budget and how our budget's running, we're running over on supplies because things cost more. We're expecting, I know that you're the same way because you have the same insurance. I think it was 30% increase in liability and
Property line.
So that's a hit to the budget. Anytime we increase our budget overall, we have accreditation standards that, we have targets that we need to hit. So if we're gonna increase the amount we're paying our folks, for example, we also need to increase our collection budget. So we stay within a certain target range of the percentage of the budget as a whole. So all that taking into consideration, what we've been looking at is a flat 4.0 mil budget. Again, all that's to say that, what it might look like if the valuation is different than we're thinking. Yeah, and I think if the valuation is more or less, then, if it's less, then maybe we may look at taking up, or we may look at compromising. I think that's part of why we're here, is that whole larger conversation and back and forth with you all in terms of, where you'd like to see the whole budget fall in terms of the mill rate. And so I think we're open to that conversation and that feedback too. We do want to see our folks continue to get an increase in salary because we are behind. We really would like to hit the target of where your all's minimum salary is, which I think is in the $13 an hour range. Most of our folks are still in the $11 an hour range. So we want to see that tick up. And that is where you will see us spend the bulk of our budget if we, what we take, the extra that we take. So almost all of it goes towards increasing the salaries of our folks. Does that tell you kind of what you're wanting to know?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And if you look on the screen, the library's appropriation, what has been sent to them in the last, say, 3 years, has gone, I guess, it stayed steady. We expect, depending on what's collected, but we expect that to run to 167,000 versus what had been in the past, 144. And like I said before, 23's budget, we just held it the same, despite the 15% or the 0.2. That's another discussion we need to have on how you want to shape that budget up.
So from 21 to 22, it went up by 23.
There's that 14% increase, yeah. That's that assessed value coming in. There are expenses that come out before, they get netted out before they get their appropriation, but for the most part, the bulk of it goes to the library. And what you mentioned, Wendy, about the property liability has gone up. Because that's another impact of that budget, is funding that property liability.
I do have, if you want to see in more detail, I brought copies. This is definitely a draft, but this is kind of what our finance committee and board have looked at, and it tells you in a lot more detail our budget. So I'll leave it with Glenn if you want to dig into that.
All right. Any questions from council for the library? Thanks for coming. You can stick around. I mean, it's gonna be a fun night.
Electric, bond, wastewater.
Yes, I appreciate being here, and I just thanks for listening, and let us know, and let us know when you want us to come back, and I'm sure it'll be more information coming. So.
Probably at the end of June.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll sneak out if that's okay.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, Rob, we'll just move right on to you.
So I don't know if you have any specific questions. I spent a lot of time on the budget this year. I worked it and then I went back and reworked it. We were told to try and hold the line, and we did the best we could, but we wanted to make the budget realistic because we have to live with it. We're trying to budget now for a lot of unknowns. We're seeing price increases almost weekly on certain things, and staples that we use a lot of: fuel, gas, oil, tires, vehicle maintenance. You're gonna see all of those items went up in every single budget of mine. Here again, it's something that we're trying to be realistic. We're trying to hold the line. We understand how important it is not to over budget, but I think the numbers that we turned in are realistic. You're gonna see a lot of numbers carried forward, in particular at a truck that the council approved, purchased last year.
Yeah, that 250.
I actually did order, but I can't lay my hands on it right now. It's real similar to what Mike's facing. Our truck has not been canceled or deleted. They still show it, but they're giving us no timeline on when we can expect it. So I continually carry that number forward. You're gonna see, as Ben was saying, you're gonna see a backhoe in there, you're gonna see a track excavator, numerous lawnmowers. Quite frankly, I've held off on some of that because I'm waiting to see what's gonna break first. Because all of it's on there because it needs to be replaced. And so at some point, yes, we're gonna have to do it. I don't know, because it's all pressing, it's all needed pieces of equipment that we use almost daily. But, so far, we've been able to keep what we have going, but it's all aging. It's all another year older, and will be another year older by the time we get through 2023. The parks budget, maybe we could talk a little bit about the parks budget. Lots of items on the parks budget went up, and I try to put a footnote on there when we're in the draft phase to show Ben and Glenn, why we're asking for more money. And most of my footnotes for the parks was due to Sullivan Square.
Yep.
It's costing way more to manage and maintain that park than we thought. And so a lot of line items in the parks budget went up. It was due to Sullivan Square. And we're trying to get into a routine with the rec and the Lumberyard Arts Center and who manages what and who staffs what. And by default, we're picking up the slack. Anything that's not being done, we have to do. As far as picking up after an event, keeping the bathroom stocked, keeping it mowed, keeping it clean, paying for the water, the electric. It's a great space, and we all love it. It's become the downtown place to be. But I'm wondering if we shouldn't develop a budget strictly for Sullivan Square, so that we can track revenue and expense and see how it's doing, and see if we need to make any changes on and how it's being operated.
No, I think we probably should. If it's becoming that much of an issue and sucking up our parks fund, because as I've talked to you about,
Right.
I'd like to see us add a handicap swing
It's
to
in there.
one of the
I
parks.
footnoted that. I went out and found them and found out what they cost, and they're expensive. But it's in there for next year.
Do you have one man designated to take care of that park?
Sorta. It's Scott Braden, who takes care of the downtown flowers. He also takes care of the restrooms, and by default, he takes care of Sullivan Square. It's a lot for him to handle because now till the end of the season, it's almost a 7-day-a-week job. So somebody has to come in on weekends if you want the flowers to look like they looked last year. And everybody loved them. They looked beautiful. The downtown was awesome, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to keep them like that. So, and he doesn't complain one bit. He's a great guy. He's an awesome worker, but it's a lot for one guy to handle.
Well, your vehicle's not getting done. Is that due to chips not being able to come in, or?
They haven't been specific as to why we haven't been able to get it. It's just, we haven't been able to get it. I would guess probably.
Is that your problem too, Mike? The
Yeah.
chips?
I don't know. They're not being that specific with us either. I don't know if it's just the chip or if it's other items as well.
So, here we are in the high overview planning stages. Something that we might consider, Finance Committee might consider is developing a separate line item, separate budget item for Sullivan Square. Because right now it does have to share with the parks by default. There's nowhere else for it to go. We have a lot of big projects going on right now simultaneously. We were, I guess, blessed with that ARPA money, which is gonna take care of at least 3 of them, which we're well on the way with. There's more stacking up behind it. We just adopted a brick street replacement program, so we're gonna be spending time with that this summer, getting the word out on that and talking more about that. Lots of stuff. I don't know how deep you want to get down into per line item tonight, but if you look at it, you'll see I always try to footnote. If I'm asking for more money, I try to put down a reason why I'm asking for more money.
overall, what was the increase year over year in your budget? Was it
So again,
overall, your total, like, was it $30,000 more you're requesting year over year, or no, your total budget that you control?
between all the departments, I don't have that number, Casey.
Okay.
Do you know, Ben?
I don't. It'd be,
It was.
I just
it
didn't know
was-
what the net change was.
It was significant. I'm sure it was.
yeah, of all the departments it was, and it is what Rob's saying, there was, Sullivan Square is a big one that was left in here. There's a mower, there's his trucks that'll get rolled over into 2023 that wasn't bought this year. So it depends on how you count those.
Yeah, a track on there.
No, but it's in there. At some point, I'd like to have one. You know, I don't want to blur the line between normal operating budget and capital improvements. I'm not sure some of those bigger projects, water line projects and things like that, you know, may be a different conversation for a different time, but just know that we are working on them.
Now, Ben, would it help with Rob's, because Rob obviously has the more expensive equipment,
Yep.
that we build in a lease
Yeah,
into that versus a straight up purchase?
definitely, especially if it's in the water or wastewater fund.
But I was thinking even like a trackhoe or a backhoe. I mean, those are
Yeah,
pretty pricey
Yeah.
items.
Some of them are also good items to have too, Casey.
I'm not saying they're not, but it's just a matter of a lease versus a purchase, outright purchase. If we get outright purchase in 1 year and we do a lease, which is a low interest, so,
It's
not-
Lease is lower than mine, lease is lower than mine, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying on a budgeting standpoint, it may be more affordable to lease versus purchase.
Pay it over 5 years instead of all cash at once.
I'm sorry?
Pay it all in pay it over 5 year span of time instead of just cash funded all at once.
Yeah.
And the local banks usually give you guys a really good rate, below market, well below market rate. That's something that I haven't had a chance to do. I know any equipment that comes out of the general fund, the lease payments come out of bond and interest. That'll put pressure on bond and interest. But depending on what you do with obviously depending on what you do with the assessed value, or revenue neutral, then that could easily be covered.
So that 120,000 overage that we had from year over year?
Well, that doesn't count the backhoe was in general fund, right?
I think so.
Yeah, there's a
I
backhoe
think-
in general fund that we
I
put
think
down
we
in
put it
reserves.
there.
That's one of them I would lease and spread out, depending on how long it lasts. It usually is over 5 to 7 years.
Backhoe, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we'll get well north of 10.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'd do like a 5 to 7 year lease on it and spread that out, and you could afford it.
15.
But
Then
that
that would be put it into play, and put it in the budget.
that 120,000 overage, or roughly there around, did that include those equipment items though? That's
No,
what
it didn't. It
Okay.
doesn't. It doesn't. In order to fund those, they'll have to be leased. What it does include is all the other line items he had mentioned, the Sullivan Square, correcting some of those line items that we just know are gonna go up, or that are already going up and just haven't been corrected in the budget process. There's a couple of them, I think we've been running $35,000 expenses that, I think he bumped it up to around 40, because it's eventually gonna hit that 40 and probably in 23.
Well, and those specific line items, I labeled that as market adjustment, because we don't know, there's increases that are happening all the time, we just don't know what we're gonna be paying for that stuff next year. That the $150,000 backhoe, that's that place marker I was telling you about. I don't know what it's gonna be. It could be a skid steer, it could be a sewer jet. I don't know, but that would likely buy any of those things, and it's just which one is gonna fail first. Which one do we need right at that moment? And doesn't necessarily mean that we're gonna spend it to buy a backhoe. We earmark the money to buy something if we need it.
I know it's just an overview, so I'm trying not to get too much in the weeds.
This will come up again. This is gonna come up again.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other questions, Rob, is we've been talking, obviously, at length about rates. Obviously, we've kind of settled on what they're gonna be. the question that comes up in my mind is there something that they need to know about that are bigger picture? It's coming down the road on the capital,
Yeah.
not equipment, the capital projects that
Right.
we probably ought to have on our scope. So I know within one of the funds, there's 200,000 for water line.
All right, well, and then the 28 fund, I bumped it up to $250,000 next year for widening and resurfacing.
Yeah.
And 50,000 for asphalt and chips out of the 28 fund. Just because at some point, and I don't know that it'll be 2023, I don't know if it won't, but we're gonna wanna do this First Street out here. It's gonna require curb and gutter, at least on the west side, to make this ditch work, and we're gonna wanna overlay this street. We've been kind of putting it off until this corridor project comes through and is complete, so we can see what this intersection down here is gonna look like. And Mike was requesting a second driveway to make that a pull through out front here for his parking lot. And so that would be a great time to try and get First Street overlaid, if we can. But, I've got the chip seal bids for this year. We opened those last Friday, and I'll be going over those with the utility committee on Thursday and hopefully bringing a recommendation to the council next Tuesday for that project. And although it's up significantly from last year, I think we'll be able to still pull off everything that we wanted to get done. We'll just have to do part of it ourselves. So here again, we're looking at another year past that. What are we gonna try and get done? I'd like to get phase 4 done, chip seal. So what's it gonna cost? I think $250,000 is gonna be a fairly close number either way we go. I mean, there's nothing says we can't skip a year. If we do an overlay project, we can always come back to it and pick it up again in 24. It's whatever the committees and the council decide is most important that year is what we'll get done, but it's expensive. Trees are expensive.
You guys good?
Yeah, I think we need to spend some time summarizing, this so we can digest the increases. And then, I don't think we need to make a prioritization. I'd like to see where ARPA funds land on the capital stuff, So, this is a lot of detail, but there's really no visibility into, how much are you proposing to increase the wastewater budget year over year, and here's why. And, that would be information would be helpful just to understand. And then to your point, it comes down to, we may have to slow down because the prices are exceeding the ability to fund it in the rate we have in the past. So 1 year street project may have to become 2 or 1.5. So it's all about that timeline. But if we see what your priorities are, to Ben's point, what are the big ones coming that maybe need to be planned 5 years ahead? And then what are the ones that are potentially gotchas if it happens this year that something fails and it's going to be an expense, and is it covered? Is it in your budget?
I've got those too. It's just those are more what I would consider capital projects.
Right.
Anything that's 150,000 or above. That number can be whatever, 100,000 of you guys tell us. We want anything over 150,000 considered a capital project, and that's how we work it.
Is that the normal accounting? Above 150 goes into capital?
Yeah.
Single project?
Yeah. It can be lower than that, but it's
Right.
really the useful life of that capital. If you get something 50 grand and it's got it.
Yep.
Is that a general?
Sorry?
Is that a general? A general thing? 150 is that a
Yeah.
general?
Yeah, just standard operating.
Okay, standard, yeah.
Yeah.
We could budget out of just operating line items typically for, $50,000 range. We could budget for that on a typical line item, operating budget.
And what I've seen in the past, those, anything to deal with streets over in the street and highway fund, out of the general fund, so that way we know it's what it looks like, and you can count on revenue coming in to cover, and putting all of that street construction over there. Right now, it's kind of split between the general fund and street and highway. But
As you play that balance though, as things move over to the fund,
It's gotta
then
be
it's,
fun.
then it's rate, and then the rates have to cover it, right?
Well, I mean, if it's street and highway funded, then, yeah, right, it's just the revenue that comes in from the state's gotta cover it. Right, and there's a reserve in the street and highway that we don't use on a regular basis. So that kind of stacks up some of that fund balance.
How do you figure how the rates on yours?
So,
But if it's on wastewater and water, yeah, rates are gonna have to go up in order to cover some of the bigger items.
so what's the reserve on that special highway fund? I assume that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Calculate what you need, and yes, it rates to
And hopefully it'll stay the same.
get. And all our rates
So
will be charged.
right now, it'd be 120,000.
Is a reserve.
You count 100,000 as reserve spent.
Yeah. So we gotta look at that.
What's our policy? I mean, what we mean, policy?
Funds like that is money in, money out. It doesn't matter.
Okay,
Unless it's
They're not operating, they're considered capital.
yeah.
You spend it all. That's what it's there for.
Does that default to that reserve if we don't spend all of that? Have a
Yeah,
widening?
it drops right down to that, yeah. And then just rolls over to that. That's what I like about it. You don't get to all the streets, you got 50 grand sitting there. But it drops right down back to that fund, and it just carries over the next year. That's something we could do this year for 23, to get it out of the general fund.
And ultimately, if that $250,000 drops to 200,000, that's what we'll work with. I mean, we'll get done what we can get done with that, if that's what it takes to make it work. I asked Steve Gordon, who runs the wastewater, to come in tonight too. If you guys have any specific questions for wastewater, that's another one that's a fairly critical fund. And Steve worked his own budget this year and presented the numbers, and so everything that's on there, he can answer any questions that you guys may have. It's wastewater specific. I know it's a never-ending project, but
Yeah, Steve, we'll let you go next.
Basically, for down at the plant, I'm just asking for another truck. We have an old 2004 Ranger it's almost last leg. It started up, it idles up 2,500 RPMs for about 5 minutes before it gets to running right, squeaks, squalls. It's
the diesel.
no, it's a gasoline one, but it's been passed around between departments for years and years. We'd like to get another 3/4 ton like our other one that we have, which we share with the snowplow crew in wintertime. When we need the 4-wheel drive to get her to our lift stations, they are borrowing it to plow the streets. We have a dump trailer, sewer jet that we pull around, so we need to have the heavier truck to pull it around. I was just asking for another 75,000 in the budget to try to get a truck next year.
Above your last year's budget? Above the last?
Yeah, above last year's budget.
You use a lot of chemicals.
Just degreasers and lift stations, mainly everything's biological down there, so. Like I said, that truck that we have down there that we use as our daily driver down, it's getting pretty wore out. We need to get it replaced here soon.
And that's something, Ben, we can put on a lease as well.
Yeah, it is,
Right.
and right now it's cash funded. The 75,000 that's in there is cash funded. You're right, we could.
So 70, am I looking at the right line?
Where you at?
Other
Where you at,
equipment
Scott?
purchases,
Okay, that line,
18,
wastewater,
18, 22.
4810.
4810.
no, it's 75. I was looking at the over under. Got you. So, increase of 70 for last year.
The other thing we're asking for is the collections department, which is all the sewer lines in town and the lift stations, is our sewer jets getting wore out. It's a water jetter we use to clean out the sewers. If sewer plugs up in the middle of the night, so we can get our customers back in service and not flood the streets and everything else with raw sewage. It's over 20 years old. It's getting pretty wore out. It's kind of on its last leg too. And it's a very expensive machine. It's around $125,000. But it's a very important machine for us to have.
And how long did our last one last?
I think we got it about 20 years ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
That's how long it lasts. When should it have been replaced?
I think they were trying to do 10-year program when
Well,
they
we-
first got
that's
the
what I
stuff.
thought, yeah. We had to do a major engine repair on that probably 3 years ago, right when I came back to Public Works as a Band-Aid, because we didn't have the money to replace it right then, so it was a get you by, and it's still working. It's not engine related, it's pump. I think it's getting weak. Pressures is not what it needs to really clean the sewers thoroughly. It's working, and here again, it's another one of those that's right on that list of things that's supposed to break first.
How many PS?
1,500 to 2,000 on average. When the pump is working right.
So Ben, I guess that's something, I mean, this fund, when we're talking about wastewater, we can get into a little bit more detail because we kind of have a plan set forth
Mhm.
that we've been talking about on funding that, and what does that do to that fund? These capital projects, or these,
No, you're right.
so, I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
What does that do to
And
that?
is any ARPA, and where does ARPA land in this? Is it identified in here at all?
No, it's not assumed to be spent other than what Rob's got. And those are small numbers compared to what ARPA's there. ARPA you can use for pretty much anything.
Can we use for equipment?
Yes. Anything you could fund out of the general government, general fund, under 10 million, you could use ARPA for. I mean, Lawrence, for some ungodly reason, they're adding people and using ARPA for that,
No, that's-
which doesn't make sense.
No.
But it's intended for capital. You can use it for any capital you would otherwise find in the general fund, water, sewer, and that includes stormwater.
So then I guess that brings up more questions for me, is the projects we're talking about using that, is that more of a necessity than the equipment we need?
Within
the
the,
equipment.
within the sewer fund, knowing what I do about the sewer fund, within that fund, that's one I would wanna lease fund that, would you say 125,000?
Yeah.
I'd wanna lease fund that thing and not use ARPA for it. Cause I think there's room in the water sewer fund to do just that and still stay within your rate structure and not cause a lot of problems. Does that make sense? That way it would
Yeah.
leave your ARPA funds there for, what we're trying to do is leave ARPA's funds there for something you otherwise wouldn't be able to put in the budget.
Like
Maybe
you can't-
water
you can't-
lines.
You can't at least purchase a new water line
Right.
or new pump
Exactly.
controls for our
Right.
pumping
Yeah.
station.
I'd kind of like to see how that all plays out. I mean, in my mind, theoretically, we could use ARPA to improve the reserve if that was our main goal.
We could get it down to the reserve, right?
Because you spend it on something, yeah, so,
We brought that up a year ago to talk about.
yeah, I think we need to have a clear visibility into, it's about $600,000 that we'll have this year. What's the plan? And how does it fit? So what it feels like is these increases are above the ARPA stuff that you're planning to spend as well. So it's a much bigger year-over-year increase than we're even showing here. Is that fair?
Probably half of that's spoken for. Probably 300,000 of that is already planned projects for that ARPA money.
That was,
Such as,
The water line extension on North 400 Road, the control upgrades at the water pumping station and the road culvert crossing on Orchard Lane. We were wondering about if stormwater would qualify or not, so we were a little bit hesitant on that, but just those three projects there is a pretty good chunk of that.
so I think
The total is 720.
720 after the June.
We already got 360. We'll
Okay,
get,
so,
this June we'll get
Right.
the next 360.
that's it. So I think what Scott may be getting at, is.
translator.
I try to help. So if we're using, is this something, I guess, and maybe this is what Scott, I see where Scott's going. Can we use some of that money to help shore off, so therefore relieve some pressure on our citizens from increasing rates? And I also understand we have needs there. Is it something that the council would think about, hey, maybe we use 50% of it on projects like that, and the other 50% on items that we need to continue servicing our customers. Therefore, we wouldn't have to increase our rates as much to cover those items. Is that
Yeah, that's eventually where the discussion is that, right? So reserve fund first, keeping the rates what we talked about, but then the next step would be, well, we might have opportunity, depending on the urgent need of these projects, to maybe not move rates as quickly. So
or as much?
or as much.
How do you resupply the fund that you're gonna take this out of?
The ARPA funds are one time.
Yeah, it's just the federal funds they've
It's a
given,
one-time deal?
one time. Yep. Have to spend it by the end of, have to
24.
24.
encumber it by the end of 2024.
Yeah, which we should be able to do.
But
But that's me. I think that needs to be part of this discussion.
yeah, because I see where Scott's going. If we can take 50% of that and identify, even if it's over the next year, to improve our cash stance on our utilities, then our increases are much lower and maybe built out over a longer time, because now we have this cash influx that can help keep
Yeah,
our
I
bills
wanna-
lower.
I want to stick it, I would want to designate it as capital reserve. Because if the feds come back and say, well, you can't technically make it a reserve, well, it's not a reserve, we're allocating it toward capital, and then we'll have it spent by 2026, which is where that 25% comes from. That's where you're, right now, gonna hit. You'll go there, you'll get there faster if you put it in,
Right.
let's say, water fund. You'll get to that 25% faster. But if you're going above that 25%, that's when you can start spending that money off after
Right.
capital.
Yeah.
That would be, what, the next year or two.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what's going on.
I mean,
I mean, so the three projects you named, my question is, are those critical
Oh, yeah.
for this year?
They've got kicked the last two budget cycles, and the, one of them we're halfway done with. The control project, it's already underway and about halfway completed. It's about 70,000 of that. And it was gonna have to happen, just, the ARPA money was just kind of fell into our lap as a way to possibly pay for that. And we discussed that as being a potential funding source, and it seemed to fit the criteria, so it just seemed a good place for part of it to go.
so is that something we had budgeted for 2022 then, and we just used the ARPA money?
It
For those-
was budgeted, it was at least proposed in 21, as well as that North 400 Road water line extension.
Was it in the 2022 budget number?
I'm sure I put it in there again, I don't know if
Yeah,
it made
they
the
got
cut or
pulled
not. Scott.
Got pulled out?
Which makes
I thought
it
got cut.
eligible for that money.
Well, that's what we're asking. Are we double funding it?
No,
Or-
it's that, no, because that's what makes it eligible, because it wasn't otherwise funded in your budget.
The Orchard Lane crossing got cut as well,
Last year. This
last year.
Yeah.
Right.
I resubmitted it for 22 as well. I believe it got cut again.
You think it got cut
I
again?
believe it did. I think it did.
How dangerous is that thing?
Well, it's dangerous enough that it needs to be replaced. I mean, you know, we've had engineers look at it and tell us that you're on borrowed time. I wouldn't want to park a fire truck on it any length of time.
Is it
And,
safe for fire trucks to go across?
It's critical. Ambulances go in and out of their food trucks, delivery trucks, and it's a one-way in, one-way out. It's critical. That's where our nursing home is, and our leisure living is back there. So
Is it safe for fire trucks to go in and out?
I can't say.
We don't take we made it a rule, we don't take the big aerial over there unless absolute, that's an 89,000 pound truck.
But the reality is, we could go across the golf course and get to those same
If
spots.
we know
That's
that
what I had
we're-
to.
We had to.
If we had to, we could get the other two fire trucks to the golf course over there as long as it didn't rain. But right now,
That's what you need the track out for.
right now, we're trying to avoid, we'll stage one of the fire trucks on that side of the bridge if it's just a fire alarm. One of us will go up. I know that sounds, but we're just not wanting to have 6 fire trucks, our fire trucks plus somebody else, other fire trucks coming and be back and forth, because we do not take the platform over there unless, if we do take it, we stage it on High Street. We don't take it down the street because Rob told me about it, I went and looked at it, and yeah, I don't think I'd want to take that 89,000 pound truck over that thing.
You got a fire hydrant on the south side of that bridge?
Yes.
I'd like to see us take a look at, both tranches of the ARPA funds and how it would play out in 2023 and beyond.
How it affects our.
How it could,
Yeah.
versus the priorities, right? So that will be the discussion, right? It sounds like these are already moving, so half of it may already be.
Well, we got bids out. We haven't approved them through the council yet.
They're doing survey work and they're,
Yeah.
preparing to send them out for bids.
I could see the water line because that's kind of a life safety thing. If that one water line gets broke, that neighborhood doesn't have a secondary. So I get all the projects you're talking about. So I'm not saying that, but I get Scott's point to say, okay, are those projects the priority? And we accomplished that with half the money. Now let's take that other half and let's start filling in these gaps so we don't have to increase our utility rates as much.
They're stacking up behind it too. Don't forget about the rural water line that needs to be replaced. Spring Creek Lake, we haven't addressed, haven't done anything out there. If we're going to do anything out there, the water line out there is going to need to be replaced at some point.
2-inch line.
No, it's a 4.
4-inch line.
There's a little section of it that's 2. So there's always the next thing stacking up behind it. There's way more projects than we have ARPA money for, and that's for council and finance to decide which is the best route.
That's right there is why I don't think you ought to push the can down the road on the rates. Minimize them is one thing, but
I'm not saying push the can down. I'm just saying minimize them.
yeah.
Minimize the
To the
impact to the
degree we
citizens.
can, and that's the big point right there, is there's projects coming down the road that we're gonna have to look at. I mean, otherwise, we're not gonna have the money to fund it again.
Right, but to your point, you can put some of this ARPA in capital reserve.
Sure.
Targeted at potential future project. List them, that may change.
Yeah, but if he's got more projects than ARPA's can handle, then
Right.
we'll have to find another funding source for it. And some of them may be eligible for the clean water, drinking water programs over the state.
Maybe build back better. I don't know. We're still working
If that
through
flushes, if that flushes through.
Right.
All right.
Usually when you start talking about
Cleared it up a little bit.
potable water, you can get money.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
State of Kansas, we have a revolving fund, the low interest loan project, and there could be a way to fund it. We get busy and we all do, and there's a lot of projects that do stack up, and, that's why we have capital improvement discussions occasionally too, because they do change and they do ratchet up the list depending on where the need is.
Yeah, there's certain grants, there's certain SRF funds at the state level that are forgivable loans for specific purposes, lead line, water lines. There's a number of different things that you can fund them with it. Right now, their rates are insanely low compared to what the market's got right now.
All it takes is one person out there to come in and say the well went bad, or it's got bacteria in it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you guys say, what I can come back with then is kind of a little matrix that's really easy to read. It shows last year's budget to this year's budget, what that increase or decrease was and why. Maybe the major reasons is what I'm talking about. I also like to list the capital that's included in those, each one of those funds, and I'm really talking about general fund, water, sewer. I'll throw electric in there too, but they're really running pretty well. But those are really the main discussion points. And then we come back, by the end of June, we'll have assessed value, so we can throw that into that discussion too. And we'll take into account ARPA then, the other half of that ARPA. And I'll get with Rob on what he's thinking on those.
We'll just show it all, where the first half went and then what's left to do.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to kind of account for where it all went.
Oh, yeah.
at this level, so we kind of understand it.
No problem. Yeah, we can do that.
Steve, I know we kind of took that over and kind of went on sidetracks. Is that?
That's pretty much the only changes we really have on it. I mean, we have money in for equipment repair and pumps and stuff. And kind of wait till towards the end of the year to order new pumps to see what we end up replacing through the year, what breaks down. I mean, we just need to keep replacing stuff and improving our equipment because everything's old down there. We just replaced a couple lift station pumps over by Scott's because of,
He was whining.
yeah.
You were whining.
Baby wipes.
Something about sewage in his
Squeaky
basement.
wheel.
Something, I don't know.
Just a regular citizen.
We have a problem with the baby wipes and trash and stuff people put in
Yeah.
the sewers, trying to get them slowed down on it. I ended up putting baskets over by his house in there that we have to dump every day.
Have you done any better with your
No,
communication
actually,
program?
the line that comes from your area, they're dumping more in there.
I swear, I swear.
Interesting.
Stop doing it, Scott.
They put the basket in, and 4 hours later, they have to dump it.
Now we see where the problem.
Pipes in the pipes.
Pinpoint.
That aren't supposed to.
Where's those shoes working over
I
there?
don't know how to deal with that, to be honest with you.
It's just something, like I said, we'll put the baskets in there, it
Yeah.
just makes more work for us.
Oh, yeah.
Try to save the pumps.
Yep.
I was supposed, do you buy pumps from them, or do they have these kind of pumps?
We buy pumps from them, we have them rebuild. That's who we work with most of the time.
All right. Who wants to go next?
I can. Do you want to discuss capital projects at all tonight? Or that's where?
Other than your big one, is there others?
And then the solar. So,
Probably just an overview.
Yeah.
okay,
So the council's.
What you see coming.
all right. We got a handout then. So, start with, we can talk about just the 2023 budget. And for the second year in a row, we've been asked to hold the line on that. And I did, for the amounts that I have any or some control over, we did do that. There are some line items in there that I have no control over. One is the price of fuel. The other is, for some reason, the liability insurance that we're paying went through the roof. And I think we need to maybe look into that, see what's going on, but so the biggest, I have 3 big items, and the biggest one is the fuel. So it took a $50,000 jump from the year before, but the price of fuel was double. To give some context to it, last February when we had that event, we brought in 3 truckloads. That event cost us $50,000 in fuel. To get the same amount of fuel would be over 100. So that's why I put 100,000 in for this year.
That would mean we have a similar event.
Correct.
What's the normal fuel usage without an event like that?
At $2 a gallon fuel, it's about 20,000. Obviously, we're talking $5 fuel now. But fuel for the public works, and it was $4.91 last week. So now, obviously, if we don't have an event, then we're not going to run that much, and we won't have that $100,000 expenditure. But I don't know how you guys wanted to handle the maybes on that. So, you know, if you only wanted to fund 50 and we end up having something like that and it turns into 100, we get the money from somewhere else.
Isn't that part of the reserve funds?
That's what the reserve's for, yeah.
I mean, you plan for those once in a decade events, but if you budget for them, it squeezes everything else, right? And then you end up not spending it. But isn't that what we would use the reserve fund for, to pay for fuel that we didn't budget because we had an unplanned event?
Ben?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that, we can change that back to 50,000 and, you know, that makes it more palatable. But as far as the other items that were increased, there really is no, the liability insurance increased by 45,000.
Yeah.
So,
Is that something we bid out every year? that we
I don't.
make
know.
sure we're checking with outside of?
I don't think so, no.
No, the way it works, we work with a broker, and they're the ones who actually sort out those.
But the broker is putting it out for bid for us
Right.
each year.
We do that every year. Yeah, that's the best we can find. So
Can we get a quick explanation from somebody who's more get their hands on it, why their liability's jumping so much for every department?
yeah, I mean that's the
'Cause they
quote they
can.
came back with this year. There wasn't anything other than that's where the market's at. Don't know why. I haven't seen an increase like that in when.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, typically it means the insurance companies
Get more
had a
risk.
had a big payout, they gotta cover.
Right. Or you have more risk.
If it was in Texas or, yeah, it's usually just catch up.
Yeah.
Is there any other options we have in insurance? The liability insurance? Do we need to check with a second broker just to keep everybody honest?
I mean, you could, but well, we're already into it actually. I mean, it's already May, so yeah, I don't know where else you'd find it.
Have other municipalities seen similar increases, or are we an anomaly here?
Oh, I have no idea.
Ben?
No idea.
That might be worth a few phone
No
calls.
idea whether. Yeah, I suspect they have, but if they're worth the same insurance, you know, let's see why it's our because we didn't have any big.
Right. Wow.
Because we did something.
Are you seeing this in other communities you work in?
I haven't seen any yet. This year, I mean, it's gone up in the past on other entities we work with, and it's gone up like this, and then next year it'll level off.
Do we use the same company for the library and everybody?
Yeah.
We can check that out.
Yeah.
Part of that insurance is, after we had Unit 5 downtown, had a crankcase explosion on that, we didn't have insurance to cover that. So we've since added a policy to cover catastrophic events on all of the engines. So that was part of the jump back in, I think I was 18 when we did that. So the part on this budget went up, quite a bit in 18 because of that. And
We did,
and
and then we found out we didn't. It was canceled somewhere in the past, but at one time we did carry mechanical failure insurance on those engines. It was during the Chris Lowe era that it was dropped. I don't know why. I'm sure it was probably something to do with cost.
The only other small increases that are playing a part on this budget here is, since we're planning on taking over the O&M on the existing solar facility, we're gonna need some equipment and tools and safety equipment to do that. But that's a pretty small increase on some of that.
Well, we haven't decided though if we're taking over that solar field.
Taking over the operation and maintenance of it.
Oh, okay.
So instead of
I thought you meant buying out the.
No, instead of Evergy paying a third-party contractor to do it, our intention is to do it ourselves in-house.
So does that reduce our cost then?
They will pay us for the maintenance that we do on it during the time frame that they still want to use.
So is that baked into the
No,
increase in
because
revenues?
we haven't really talked about what that means for a revenue stream.
Okay.
But
I think it'd cover.
it would,
Better
yes,
cover.
it better cover,
Yeah.
yes.
We got a person qualified to do that.
I'm doing training right now.
Are you?
Then intend to have another guy start next year and then the third guy.
So you're working on job security, is that it?
Staying busy.
So on the electric fund, the nice thing, the thing about the electric fund, what was submitted isn't, there you cut it. So what he's talking about is not cut out of here. So like the fuel increase of 50,000, it's actually in the fuel line at 100,000 where it was 50. That's actually in there.
But
And it's still balanced. The reason it's balanced is because there's reserves for, I think GRDA, and there's reserves, just a giant reserve, $750,000 reserve to set aside. There's a bunch of line items that are that are typically budgeted maybe twice what they really need to be. We haven't touched them because they can go up at any time. If they're not spent, these guys just don't spend it.
fuel is the biggest, one of the big things too, is we always budget enough to handle an event, or we thought we budgeted enough to handle an event. And obviously last year
We're gonna bump that up.
we were under last year.
But if we didn't budget it, we could reduce the rate, right? For electric?
There's a boring machine in there too. That's 300,000. That's in this thing. And that is actually would have to come out of reserves at this point.
You say a boring machine?
Some type of boring machine.
Or underground.
I think where Casey's trying to get at
No,
is,
that wouldn't be.
The base rate.
no, I mean, if, in my head, when I hear we're conservatively budgeting, to make sure we can cover all events, that's how your reserve fund gets to be 2x of what you target it to be. I mean, you're not spending it, which is great, but it's just sitting in the reserve fund. And I think if we were a little bit more on target with what we budget to what we actually spend, then that could potentially impact the rates.
It could, and you could turn around and go right back up like you do in the water fund too, 5, 8, 10% if something breaks.
Right.
That's the problem. And then what are we gonna buy the 2 machines? That's gonna cut your reserves immediately down to your policy. And right now I'm sitting on a 2-notch decrease because we're not at policy.
Ben, can I ask a question on that too?
Sure.
According to the graph you had up there earlier, it looked like the end of 2023, the electrical reserve was 1.9.
1.8.
So it is not 3 million like we talked about in the past.
No, well, that's just the operating fund. There's money set aside in reserves.
Okay.
That'll be.
I didn't understand that part,
Yeah,
so.
that'll be the other half of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Why wouldn't you lease purchase that boring machine?
You could, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all those decisions,
Cash,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah,
a
that's
piece
just
of
all part of
equipment.
it.
Why would you pay cash for that?
no, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
to your point, then, those are the discussions about the budget, how you're gonna pay for it,
Yeah.
and what do the rates need to be to cover it, with enough reserve that we're comfortable. And not 2x.
Yeah.
And it wasn't 2x, I mean, it got to that point over time.
And I don't think there's a whole lot of spending that was going out of that fund either.
Right.
That we're looking at right now. I mean, he just give you a list, it's probably $1 million long
Over that.
that needs to go now. So without the rates, you're not gonna be able to do that.
But I'm not saying
Right.
dropping them in half, right? I'm just saying, just a little reduction, I guess, to
Yeah, no,
kind
I-
of counteract some of the.
Yeah, the policy you guys have is to balance the rates
It's in his
with the
budget, I
need,
noticed.
but you need to know what the need is.
Correct.
So that need, I'll guarantee you that need is gonna give you a reason to keep those rates right where they're at. He's giving you right now what it is. Even if we drop every line he's got, he's still got enough money to replace every line that he will be able to drop. That's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to avoid 4 or 5 years down the road, like we're doing with the water fund right now, having to find ways to spread that out instead having and we're not asking for increases at all.
Yeah.
Not an increase is actually a move backwards with a 6-8% inflation. It's actually going backwards.
Right.
Because his cost is gonna go up a lot faster than what those rates would ever think about the revenues going up. That's my only concern.
But my thought or question or wherever my mind's going is that if we pay for cash for the engines, right, and then we bond the substation,
Yep.
our projections for that bond originally were for everything, and that was almost equal, a little less than what our current bond payment is. So even then, we're still going to see a reduction in our total bond payment. So why couldn't we?
I haven't structured the bond, the substation. How much is the substation?
Well, before it was going to be around a $400,000 bond payment because it was total of $6 to $7 million for all this in there.
Yeah.
So if we pay for cash for the engines,
Yeah, sure.
then our bond payment shouldn't even be close to what our current bond
No,
payment
you're right.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, unless something comes up, you're right.
So
That's one of those, what we talked about at the committee is if something like that capital-wise goes down, then that goes knocks down.
Right.
You cover your operations, and then you also have a piece that covers capital. That capital starts dropping, that rate stops dropping. Capital goes up, the rate goes up with the capital, but your operations always stay the same. Does that make sense? I think that's what you guys are saying.
yeah, it makes sense. I'm just trying to think of it holistically with the bond payments looking at dropping over
Yeah,
the
that's
next.
just math. I just need to plug it in.
Yeah, and then now seeing this that we're kind of I don't want to make anybody feel like I'm calling them out, but over budgeting for fuel and just little line items like that.
Yeah.
All I'm asking is that something we can ratchet back to actual, let's say
And see
even
what-
5 years or 10 years
Yeah, sure.
historical data,
Yeah.
and then say, okay, this is what we're going to budget. We still got $2 million in the reserve fund
Yep.
if we're off a little bit here and there.
Yep, and then
And
we
then-
make it up in multiple years back to the reserve fund to get, if we're at 25%.
Yeah.
And we stay between 15 and 25, I mean, to me, that 10% is for all those things that were unbudgeted, that you have to do.
And that would require a policy change.
Well, we talked about that,
Okay.
right? I think we discussed a
15 to 25.
15 minimum, 25 target, but 15 minimum. Didn't we discuss that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Council meeting? I think the plan was to talk about that again at the end of the year, make a decision on it after we go through this process, but then you have that flux, then it's like if you drop in the reserve,
Yeah.
you stay above the minimum, but then how do you make it back? So there may have to be a tweak to the rates or whatever to get it back over a 3 or 4 year period.
What's
How
almost
is this possible?
it's almost misleading to use the last few years because we kind of need to get out of the weeds with some of this big
So that's
stuff.
why I said 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, yeah,
You know.
okay.
And that's not taking, I still think that's conservative because that's not taking into any growth, right? If we budget, if we do those projections off the last 5 to 10 years, and I know that costs our utilities a little bit more with the
I can go
growth.
back and do that. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I can go back and run those and see, and still bring it back in the matrix that we're talking about.
So I think, and maybe where I'm getting to is we know that there's going to be increases probably in our assessed valuation, right? Substantially. And how can we help our citizens save money on other things
Yeah.
without having to, continually
Yeah.
compound the situation and cost of
Yeah,
living?
no, I understand.
Not everything should hurt next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Without putting our budget in. I don't want to put you guys in a bind either. I'm just trying to find that happy medium.
Right.
That's the other thing I wanted to bring up was this is the second year in a row we've been asked to say, neutral and
That's because that's where we start at. Every year we
Okay.
want to start at revenue neutral and what do we have to have?
Okay.
So that way by the time the assessed valuation comes up, that gives us a number saying, okay, these are our must-haves. These are what we need to bring out from that assessed valuation. But what we said as a committee and as a council last year is, let's start every budget year as revenue neutral. We know that costs go up every year. But let's see what that looks like and what impact that has to our city.
that's what I was gonna say is I've kept these numbers, pretty much the same for 2 years and we all know that every line item there, you can't buy the same amount of stuff we were
Right.
buying 2 years ago for that amount of money. So we're dropping services. And I don't think that's a practice that we really wanna do with our electric utility. And
Right, but
So-
so that discussion is what we have to bring out in the SB 13 hearing. If we're not revenue neutral, we have to go have a
well, but
hearing.
he's talking about electric. Electric doesn't have any property tax.
Well, but there's the
Transfers.
transfers, there's the operating piece of that,
Yeah, yeah.
which
It
is
yeah.
not, it's not the big piece of it, but it's part of it. So
Yeah.
part of it is salaries,
Mhm.
those need to go up, insurance, all those things that are impacted by, we're gonna have to explain it.
Yeah, sure.
Right, and then the conversation really needs to be had also around the utility rates. They need to be this because fuel's going up, all those things. People need to hear that.
We did it to
Oh, yeah,
force the
I agree.
conversation.
Right.
I agree.
So that we have the knowledge,
Right.
so we can explain it to the public when we're asked.
Exactly.
That's
So
that's
it's
the
like-
intent of this.
The only way to be revenue neutral, we're gonna have to step back on services, and here's what we would do. And it's probably not a good conversation that anybody's gonna wanna hear, but that's the reality, right? And then we can talk to that and say, well, so we chose not to because we didn't want to degrade the services.
I think, I know I did, and I'm sure Chris did, and probably Rob and everybody in this room, kind of kept their numbers back to try to meet your goals, but in reality, we can't do the services that we did 2 years ago.
And that's the
did.
type of
So-
stuff that we're trying to pull out.
Yeah. We understand that. We just forces a conversation to say prioritization first. Okay, we can't do that. Here's what I need back no matter what, and then at some point it gets to, well, I can move that to next year. So it's that level
That's
of
what we're
discussion.
doing.
Because the other side of the
That's what
pendulum
happens.
is we know we can't fund everything, right? So there's two sides of the pendulum, and we decided to start at the most conservative side, so that way we can build up from there. That's all.
Yeah. And you made it's timing, right?
Yeah.
And so as costs go up and our revenues don't go up to keep up with it, we have to spread these out now longer than we probably originally wanted. Or do you increase the revenues to try to do it quicker? It's really that discussion. We want to do it in 2 years, or it's a 3-year project. Well, maybe it needs to be 5 now if we don't change any revenue income.
In our world, that's reliability.
It is, but that's the
We're losing
discussion.
reliability by not keeping up with our
And that's
testing and maintenance.
that's the discussion, yeah, absolutely.
To get on with the CIP, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. The generation, got 4 different options there. Two other options came up last Friday. It's the top 2. But looking through all these, we're looking at, for a 1700 kW unit, we're looking at $750,000 installed. It doesn't matter which unit we're talking about. The first one I like because it qualifies, it's the newest unit. It qualifies as being able to be registered without adding catalyst. So that makes it top of the line for me. That's of the 4 on here, that's the one I like the most. The second one underneath that, same situation, but it's old enough that it would have to have catalyst added to it. So that's an additional charge. That's why it looks to me like it's the same price on paper, but the unit's cheaper. But to upgrade the catalyst on it gets it right up to the price of the 2008 models. So, and then the 2 underneath, they're actually a little bit more because they have brand new generators on them. They're used engines with brand new generators that fit the voltage we need. So that's the 4 options, best options that I have right now. And I really like the top one. To this.
I do too, because it's only $350 to install. I'm just teasing.
$50, yeah.
Oh, I didn't put
We're holding the
That
back.
is cheap until you-
Good.
Okay, then the other things are the solar fields. This is all stuff that we can talk about in the future, but this is the first year that's actually produced what it should because of the inverters having issues in the past. So once we get a couple of years of the inverters working completely the whole year, I can start a spreadsheet and we can start looking at whether it's going to be beneficial to own it or just continue as a PPA. So I don't have a whole lot of new information on that. But it is, year 8 is actually coming up. It's 2026 will be year 8. Fall of 2026 will be start of year 8. So it is on the radar.
What's wrong with this 208? How come they're out of service? How do you know that?
As far as I know, the top 3 and these three and these 3 are all in the same building. And I don't know why they're being taken out. I don't know if they're being upgraded to new ones or if the building's being shut down. They're all in a building in Oklahoma somewhere. That's all the information I've been given. The stuff's kind of hush-hush. There's enough interest in some of this stuff that nobody's spreading a lot of information on. But those 6 are in one building right now. And all of these 4 options are all low-hour units. They're all around 500 hours or less. So, which is nothing for you. I'm sorry. I'm not. Foley might be.
Okay.
But it would take a pretty big building to need that much, to meet as much generation as our load is. So we're talking about a building that has as much load as our town to need that kind of generation. And the only other thing is come down the pike if we do the second solar array, and that's obviously way too early to talk about now.
When do we have to have a decision on the purchase of the solar array? Our current one?
2026 is the first year we
26.
have the option to purchase. And then any year after that, we can purchase.
What is the rate of efficiency lost that we've been told by Evergy occurs with those panels?
So I put on there that the panels themselves are warranted, actually I took that off. Panels are warranted to not exceed 1% a year.
Okay.
They are averaging, most of those panels are averaging a 0.5% a year. And the inverters do have some loss of efficiency also. But typically they have a 15-year lifespan anyway, so they're gonna degrade till 15-year mark, and then you're probably gonna wanna replace them. And then hopefully get your second 15 years out with your existing panels. So the hope is to do, one set of panels and 2 inverters during the 30 years. And some of them are they think will last 40 years.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So there's a lot of politics behind that. There's one side saying, oh, you don't want solar panels, they're too inefficient. No, they lose their energy anyway. And then there's the reality of it. And I'm just wondering, you guys can actually read the numbers and see how efficient they are.
Sure.
So that's, yeah.
And like I said, once we get a few years down the road, I can show you, in a spreadsheet what they're doing.
Right.
And we can go from there, and we'll have some better ideas of what the O&M costs are going to be, and what the insurance, we'll have to find out what it costs to insure it.
Sure.
What you can want to see is like panels out beyond 8 years though.
Right.
So
Look at
what have people actually seen from 10 to 30 years with that same technology?
Right.
Otherwise, you're kind of breaking ground on whether you only degraded 0.5% a year.
Well, there is no history of that because
I
all
know.
these panels are
That's
all
the problem.
generation.
That's the problem. I mean, you'll have history, but you won't have anything that really talks about the lifespan of these things.
Right, but the mechanism of how they degrade, I've done a little research, doesn't really suggest it changes much. That's the life, that's the rate that it degrades at. And so I'd like us to go into it avoiding any scare tactics on the solar.
Sure.
I'm just gonna be real blunt about it.
I think a realistic is a 0.5%.
Okay. 0.8 is what I was
Okay.
kind of showing,
Per
but
year.
that's way better. And I'm sure a lot goes into that too. I mean, how clean are you keeping the panels? I mean, there's a lot of variables there. Temperature,
The
yeah.
hotter they are,
Sure.
the more they're going to degrade.
Right.
What are they capable of producing if they're brand new?
Like our array we have now, I've seen as high as 950 kW at one time.
It's rated for one.
It's rated for one megawatt, 1,000 kW. And I've seen right at 950,
What do you see
And that's-
now?
a couple hours a day.
What do you see now?
It's doing that now. It's producing as much now as it ever has because of the inverter problems we've had the last couple of years. But they were, the last repair they did on them was, I think, one of the last days of December. And they've been all on ever since. We've not had any issues with them. Hopefully that's behind us.
All right. Which one of you two want to go next?
I'll go. Ben, I don't know if you got mine up there or not, but mine's very minimal. We tried to, with the marching orders we had, it was to stay neutral. So we tried to do that as much as possible. So the few line items that I have on mine that have increased a little bit are just due to vehicle costs, repairs, things like that. We have one line item in the ammunition that we're increasing slightly because we are transitioning our shotguns to less lethal shotguns. So we'll be cycling out the ammunition used in that currently to beanbag rounds, which we can then use as a less lethal option for us, which we haven't had in the past. So that's the only cost that you see difference in that line item. And then the equipment purchases, it's always been budgeted at 4,000. We've never been at 4,000. One year was 11, 1 year was 16. So that, and I'm only requesting it to go up to 10 just because it's more realistic. It's just not an option for us to be under $10,000 in that line item. the way things cost these days and what we have to replace. What I haven't put in here, because I was trying to stay neutral through all of it, is stuff that I've talked with Glenn about already in professional development and for our officers, for retaining and retention, and to entice people to come work here. We are working on a program that I'll roll out to Glenn as soon as we can finalize it for having incentives for officers to learn new avenues of their job. I don't want our officers to just be general law enforcement officers. I want them to excel in different areas that they can, if they have an interest in evidence processing, I want them to go for that. I want them to get higher education in that, but we want to pay them for that because there's an incentive to want to do that. So there's a benefit to the city to have them do that, but there's a benefit to the individual as well. So we're really working on a lot of those things. There are several different things that they can do. They can be part of a tactical team, a countywide tactical team that they haven't had options before in the past. They do now. That they have the option to try out for that. And part of that is due to my ability to have friends in those areas that they haven't had in that area before. So those are the kinds of things that you're not going to see in there, but those things cost money. And I don't have an exact dollar amount, that's why I didn't put them in there. But like I said, the only things we have for the police department are some minimal costs on just commodities and things like that we have to pay for. So that's really it in a nutshell. To recap some of the stuff we did this last year that you guys allowed us to do, the rifle program, we were allowed, basically did a $20,000, $25,000 changeover. It only cost the city about $3,000. And that's because you allowed the officers to lease pay for their own item. They'll own it, they'll take care of it better. And it's something that we decided to think outside the box and do here that they've done in other areas. And that program is going to work extremely well. We can't do that for everything, but that was one thing that you allowed us to do that was a minimal cost to the city. The other thing is we have a lot of pride in our uniform, but this is the only uniform we have. When we go to functions with other agencies for funerals, for celebrations and things like that, people break out their Class A uniforms. We don't have those here. I'd like to have that here at some point, but those are very, very expensive. Just a jacket alone is about $300 per person. A hat is almost $200. You know, those things are very, very expensive, but we'd like to have those things, but that's not going to keep us at neutral.
So do you have that list of, you kind of have a vision of where you want to get to, and if you don't start putting it out there, it'll never get planned in.
You're talking about putting an exact dollar amount?
Well, or just some round numbers.
Yeah.
Because
we're working
you don't
on that right
know,
now.
and then you pick a number, it might not be enough, but at least you get started.
Sure. No, we can definitely get those numbers, but I don't have them tonight.
No, I think that's,
Yeah.
the plan is to see what the critical must-haves, and then, hey, this is where we want to go as a department, here's what we think the city's going to need from a services perspective.
It's a hard sell right now to get somebody to want to do this job. And so we're competing against everybody else as well, because there isn't one agency. You can't fall down and hit a law enforcement agency that doesn't have an opening that they're trying to fill. And for us, we're a small town, but we try to make up for it in work environment and forward thinking, that we want you to be happy here and that the city is behind us. We have never not felt supported by the city in any way. It has never been that feeling for us whatsoever. We're very appreciative of that. So we try to take the budget process very seriously because we don't want to ask for something that's not a need. When it comes down to professional development stuff, I think it would totally enhance our department, but do we absolutely have to have it to work tomorrow? No, we don't. That's a hard thing.
No, but if it's a competitive disadvantage, if others are, if it's a retention issue, then you won't know that you should have had it until you got a big problem.
You're exactly right.
So it's one of those that, you have to be convinced it's an issue, and you're trying to avoid it, and then share that and convince, council that, hey, we need to get ahead of this.
Yeah.
So you continue to hire quality officers and they stick around.
I'm happy to put a dollar amount to it. I just don't want to bring it to you as a dire emergency because it's not. But it does talk to the forwardness and the future of the department. It really does. You guys bonded and spent money for this facility, which you'll get a tour of here in a minute. I can't thank you enough. The people that work here can't thank you enough for that. The pride that they have coming to work in this building is not measurable from where we used to be downtown. Now, we miss being downtown, don't get me wrong, but coming to this facility is an absolute joy. It really is.
So, Chief, one thing got brought up, and I can't believe it. Can't remember if it's finance or what. Was the Tesla conversation that we had two, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Have you done any research or seen or went in? I know we did a little bit of research back then that our payback was 3 to 4 years, based on the service, the lower maintenance requirements on those. Have you looked at that any further?
We have, and when I say that we have, I'm on an email list, sir, that gets what's called e-vehicle or e-gov information, and it's all about agencies who are fleet managing electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those electric vehicles are in other areas other than law enforcement. They're doing them in admin positions and things like that where it's more applicable. We run so
we
much
talked about
equipment.
getting a smart car.
I'm sorry?
We talked about getting you a smart car.
And I'll drive anything you get. We have so much equipment that runs constantly in that vehicle. When an officer gets in, I don't know if many people know this, when an officer gets inside their vehicle and they turn that key on, that key never comes off throughout the entire 12-hour shift. It never gets shut off, because if they do, the computer inside turns off and their connection to the emergency dispatch center severed. Then the only way they can contact anybody is through this. All the information for all the call systems go through this computer dispatching. Then when they say, like my unit number's B950, they say B950, respond to the call. They don't tell me where it's at. If I don't have my computer up, I don't know where it's at. And if that car gets shut off, it's gone. It's not there. Then you have to start it up, you have to re-log into it and get the information. So that vehicle stays on all the time. I haven't seen the studies for electronic vehicles for police use. Hasn't been out there really long enough for us to know whether or not an electric vehicle will supply the power needed for a 12-hour shift for an officer with all the equipment running that entire time, plus run the vehicle when it needs to go somewhere. So I don't know that really answers your question. I'm hoping someone else does it for their entire department, and then we get to see what happens with that. I've not seen where a department has actually done that.
Do you think that it would save us money on long term to maybe like the school resource officer, to somebody that is out of their car more?
Even out of his car, the car still sits there and runs.
Okay.
His car is not turned off either, because his computer has to stay up and running. Otherwise, it doesn't even show him on duty. That's how everything runs through this computer now. It's amazing what the technology does. But when that is severed, it's like you don't exist. Unless you call on the radio and say, hey, I'm still here, they think you're not working as soon as that car shuts off.
I think we should look more into it. I found a few towns. There's one in Indiana, Bartlesville, Indiana. They do their entire fleet is electric vehicles. There's a couple in Florida. It'd be worth kind of maybe checking with them and seeing.
Do you know what their infrastructure is in their city about how they charge and where they charge?
And they may be going on 8-hour shifts too. I don't know. You never know how their schedules are or anything like that. But I don't know. It might be worth looking at it, because you just look at every one of these line items for maintenance and gas and Bartlesville with a G. It sounds foreign to us who are familiar with Bartlesville.
It's a bargain.
Yeah.
Or maybe, do you have access to send out a request on your listserv to say, hey, is anybody?
No, it's an email. It's like a mass email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you have access to be able to?
I don't think you can reply to it. Like, I can't. It's a e-gov type of thing.
Okay.
I don't think I have the ability to, like, if somebody sent that email out to me, for me to reply to it and go to everybody, I don't think that has that option, because they don't want 60,000 people going down and doing that 60,000 times.
Yeah. I knew when I was with the state, we had access to a listserv like that, and we could send out requests to every agency to say, hey, tell us your results on what you're seeing on this, and how your system works, so we put that all together and send our.
Now, what I do have access to, I'm a graduate from the the FBI National Academy. That has an avenue where I'm part of the Kansas and Western Missouri chapter. I can send an email out to all of those folks asking if anybody in that region has done this, and if so, what's their information? And happy to do that.
And even if we, like Corey said, Bartlesville, if, a trip up there, maybe just to see how their infrastructure is working and see how they operate compared to us.
Indiana.
Yeah, that was the one that, there's a
And that's their
maintenance
entire
bureau.
department?
That's what it said, yeah.
Okay.
And it said each one of their vehicles got paid off in 2 years, I think.
I mean, you're talking about there's no engine involved
Right.
in that, so.
So, and then it's all it might be a custom thing too. Tesla has, I think, a law enforcement section on their webpage where I think they're really trying to increase that. So
Sure.
we're all going to be there eventually. This is going to be there eventually. I just don't, if we can get ahead of the curve on it, it might be cool.
And I'll be honest, I don't want to be the guinea pig. I don't want
I
to
get
have
it.
to spend a bunch of capital trying to figure it out. I want someone else to figure it out
Sure.
and tell me it works.
Yep.
And it'd be a phased-in approach anyway.
Sure.
I mean, it'd be
One a
one a year.
For
Yeah.
7 years.
And
Which we
then-
know how well that's working out right now.
Yeah. one at a time.
Hey, maybe their supply chain's better.
One at a time.
Very well could be.
Then you have your own data that, you stop it at one if it just didn't, didn't
Yeah.
work. You thought it would and it didn't.
What I assure you is that we are not afraid to think outside the box. So,
I definitely would like to look at. I know when we ran our projections even 2-3 years ago, 4 years ago, it showed a payback to the city pretty quickly.
yeah, you showed that to me and
Yeah.
talked to me about it at that time. And I keep reading these articles that come up on this email server, and I get probably one every 2 days, honestly. But they're not always about law enforcement vehicles. A lot of these are admin vehicles that aren't used all the time, and that seems to where most people get the bang for their buck. A vehicle that can actually sit dormant and take a charge while it's not being used. Those kinds of things is what I've been seeing mostly.
Are these vehicles large enough to carry the equipment that you need to carry?
It kind of depends. Without an engine compartment, that front area is actually fairly large. So it's not, but I haven't actually physically seen one that's been outfitted in person. But I would assume there's plenty of room.
They actually got a lot of room. The one I had, the trunk was huge in the back, and then you did have that little front trunk for the littler stuff. But it's got
Electric fire engine
Yeah.
now too.
uh,
They have electric pumpers, fire pumpers.
California got the first all-electric Rosenbauer fire truck.
That's
Wow.
They just had it delivered, I think, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, and it's huge. I mean, it's as big as my platform, and it's an all-electric fire truck.
They're running pumps off electric, everything?
Yeah, everything's run off electric. It's 100% electric.
Wow.
But that's one of them things where everybody else is sitting back, like he said.
Right.
I'm not getting one. Because if you have a massive fire in like downtown Baldwin, how long is that truck gonna last at full, running at full everything?
Yeah.
So, I haven't read up a lot about it, but I'm gonna contact the guys I deal with, Rosenbauer, and try to get as much information. Cause I'm curious, how long will it last? How long will it run? If you're pumping at a high RPM, how long will the battery last?
And if we don't fully fund our electric department.
Yeah, it's
There you go. It all
How
comes
big a
back.
service did they put in here?
They're gonna be running hose from a fire hydrant, and then now he's gonna run electric line to a plug-in somewhere in somebody's house.
But no, I think all of that is probably worth looking into, and we have been looking into that. I read those articles all the time. I'm looking for the guinea pigs to do it and to tell us and come back and say, there's no reason not to go to it. So where we're not expending capital trying to figure it out.
just seems smart, I guess, to me, just for the maintenance side of it. If you're keeping 7-year-old vehicles.
Give that person a call on COVID. What Cody's talking about.
I'm sure they're getting lots of calls. Be like, hey,
Oh, yeah. You gotta think.
our city council suggesting this to us.
How bad is
We want to talk to you real quick.
But I don't know if you guys have any more questions about what we're doing in the police department as far as budget stuff, things like that. Happy to answer.
Good.
All right, welcome to our new police department.
It's awesome.
Thanks for hosting.
You bet.
All right.
When are we having one in the fire department, chief?
Yeah.
What, electric fire truck?
No.
As guests for our meetings.
Actually, my station is set up from last Thursday when I hosted the Chiefs Association meeting. So I still have all my tables
Well,
and
hey.
square in there. And you guys are more than welcome anytime.
I've been in there to vote. There's comfy couches too. We don't sit in chairs.
Got one recliner, you guys can buy that. I did get Ben called today before this. 3 years ago, I bought 7 new radios. I didn't replace them all because our old ones we were still able to use them. So we're still using some of the old ones. But Motorola, the radios that we still have that are Motorola, we can't get parts for them anymore. Nobody, I mean, if you can find somebody that has parts, they'll fix it, but trying to find the parts, they're just not manufacturing them. I'm pretty sure me and Ben had it in there somewhere to replace the last 7 last year. I just didn't do it. I didn't want to spend the money because we needed a couple other things, small stuff, nozzles, a couple hoses, stuff like that. And really, to be honest, the only thing I need to purchase right now is the last 7 radios. That's it. Because you guys were nice enough to give me the new engine upgrade. The other 04 engine, we're calling it a reserve engine. It's good for another 10, 15 years, easy. The 04. The only other vehicle we'd probably replace anytime soon would be one of the brush trucks. And that would be and what we plan on doing, I'm not gonna go out and buy a $250,000 brush truck. I wanna buy a pickup, 1-ton flatbed, single wheel, and then we'll just take the skid unit off the old truck, bolt it on the new truck.
Sounds like we might have 2004 ready.
But other than that, for us, the only thing that fluctuates for us is payroll. And the reason our payroll get paid by the call, so it fluctuates. Last year we ran, our busiest ever was 805 calls last year, which is, Eudora City's bigger than Baldwin City, and we ran 70 more calls than they did last year for a total. We're already projected to run close to 900 this year right now. We're at almost 300 calls already at this time right now, after the one I just ran. We're at almost 300 calls for the year already. So,
21, it was 75,000. We're over 100,000 in 2023's budget.
yeah. And like I said, it just fluctuates with call, and our call volume's not gonna slow down.
Yeah.
That's projected by Lawrence, LDF, or Lawrence Fire. I had to talk to Chief Fagan, the interim chief, and they increased like 10,000 or something like that. I mean, it's just, and every year it just calls keep going up and up and up. And as the city of Baldwin grows, our call volume is going to keep going up. It's never going to go, I don't ever see it going backwards. I really don't. The only thing other that I have that I'm going to let you guys know that's probably going to get brought up in the next year or so is hiring one full-time firefighter 8 to 5. He'll have fire 1, fire 2, and be an EMT. Us trying to get volunteers anymore, and like law enforcement, nobody wants to do it anymore. Lawrence Fire Medical has hired 19 new ones. Out of, I think, the 19, 6 of them have already quit because of requirements. This is what I hear. But, it's just, for our call volume, I have 11 on my roster, but the same 9 are constantly working or running calls. Right now, during the day, it's me, Marcy, and one other person every other day because he has a full-time fire job. So, I have a full-time job. So it's getting to that point. Baldwin's growing enough, the call volume's up there enough that we're going to have to look at maybe hiring at least one to start with, an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and then the rest of us kind of help cover at night and on weekends. It's just, Eudora City has a full-time chief and assistant chief, and we still run more calls than they do. And we cover every one of our calls. We've never not shown up. We've not had to have somebody come call somebody else to cover for us. We've never had to do that ever in the history since I've been here, in almost 20 years. But with the medicals, it's getting tougher. I'll give you an example. Call it Monday morning. We had a call at 3. We caught a call at 5. The county went ballistic. Our medic unit was in Willow Springs' area. So we got a medic unit out of Lawrence, they had a car accident over, you know, it was crazy. And then we caught another call right after that, so we waited for another medic unit to come back from Lawrence. So the city of Baldwin, maybe the residents of Baldwin don't realize how much it's us most of the time. They count on us being there first because our medic unit's not always here. They're training, doing a transfer, I mean, whatever it is. I mean, we're there sometimes 20 minutes before the ambulance shows up, 25 minutes, just depends. So the residents are starting to notice, the ones we run a lot, they ask that question, well, where's the ambulance? Well, it's not here yet. It's gonna be here, but it's not here yet. And if this poor guy here is having chest pains, you don't wanna wait another 20 minutes for somebody to show up and tell him he's gonna be okay, or, you know, get some vitals, get information. It's scary when you're waiting there 20, 25 minutes for an ambulance, let alone somebody falls, breaks an ankle. They don't want to lay there on the ground outside for 25 minutes and nobody helping them. So, I mean, we're kind of vital anymore. I mean, people are starting to see that. So, like I said, really my budget, I don't need to change anything except for the purchase of the last 7 new radios. That's it. At least this year at all. So, unless, like I said, something unexpected happens, I don't see it happening. I can't project call volume. I can just tell you right now, we're almost 300 for the year, so you can always get higher or lower.
Most of these calls, these increasing calls, is that due to medical?
Yep.
Is it due to the age of the community?
Sometimes. We'll have a week that it's people your age or somewhere around there.
I'm only 30.
Yeah, whatever, Jerry. Let's say they're between my age and your age. How about that? They're older people. And then you may have 5 calls in a row that people are under the age of 25. I mean, it can happen. It's just, there's no rhyme or reason, but yes, because we are an older community, that's kind of sometimes part of it. But Eudora's an older community too. They have a lot of older community over there too.
What?
The fire department needs.
I don't see no rhyme or reason for it
No, I
sometimes,
used to.
but it is what it is.
Oh, I'm too
So,
old.
we'll just keep running them when the pager goes off. That's all we worry about.
Well, hurry
I
up,
loved it
because it
then.
could happen to me anytime.
Yeah, I know. Don't worry, Jerry, I'll be there.
I know you will.
But
Yeah.
anybody have any questions?
Oh, sounds good.
So,
You've always said you're gonna throw me under the bus. You know.
yeah, someday.
All right, Ben. So can you give us kind of an overall view of?
Yeah, things we've got to follow up on and we'll bring back into June. Obviously, number one is assessed value, where that's going to be and how much that entails. I'll put together a matrix that shows the budgets, general fund, water, sewer, electric, what changes are in those from 22, might do 21, 22, 23, just so you can kind of get a flavor. And just rolled up summary. Those aren't line items. That way it's easy to see. Within each one of those budgets, what's included with the major items that are included, but also include a list of those items that we've kind of gone over tonight. If not forgot about, we'll add more, if you know what I mean. That way you've got a full kind of what's on the horizon. Does that make sense? On each one of these funds. And then the last thing is how are we going to fit ARPA into this, the second half? Get a list of what Bob's doing now for the first half. What are we going to do with the second half? So we can discuss that.
And it sounds like our June work session needs to be the last Tuesday of the month
That's
because
what I
of
think, yeah.
the assessed valuation
Give us
coming out.
plenty of time, right? Great.
Is there any other questions from the council? All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your tour guide is waiting.
Let's take a tour.
Okay.
Quick.